Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Big Sky Now podcast. I am your host, Josh Amick, with my panel, as always, Fritz, John, Mark, and Ian. This is going to be the final episode of the season for the Big Sky Now podcast. We will be switching over to basketball in the next couple of weeks, but that won't have the same panel. It will just be me and John breaking down basketball for you guys, so stay tuned for that. But jumping into the last episode of the season, we're going to try to do our best to wrap up the season and give you guys updates on where the transfer portal stands, because it is a lot to track. We're going to start with Montana State after that disappointing loss in the national championship. They've so far have had 11 players enter the transfer portal. Not everyone has necessarily signed with the team yet, but I did get word last night that Rohan Jones is leaving and he is going to Arkansas. So that is actually official. They also lost offensive coordinator Tyler Walker and O-line coach Al Johnson. A lot of moving parts here for the Bobcats, Fritz. I want to know, who do you think is the biggest loss of this season for the Bobcats, whether it be a coach or a player? What do you think is going to change next season for this team?
Well, if I had to pick one guy, I would probably pick Al Johnson, the O-line coach, because of the job he did this year. You know, they lost two guys to the portal, two All-American starters to the portal off the O-line last season, and then had their All-American center get hurt for most of the season, and they still cranked out the second best rushing offense in the FCS. So obviously he's a great coach. Whoever takes over for him is going to have to replace two graduating seniors and Connor Moore, who was probably the highest profile transfer out of the Big Sky. He landed at Michigan State. And then Rohan Jones, who I'm going to miss, is the next at going to Arkansas, as you mentioned. The number is actually 14, as far as I can tell, going to Sam Herder's website and looking at something that I think one of the media relations people from the Big Sky Conference counted it up. It's up to 14. Not all of them have found homes. Mm-hmm. I know Lanyata Alexander, the wide receiver that started off and on, he's going to Idaho. And yep. Other than that, you know, I'm second place behind Al Johnson. I think Scott Trey Humphrey is going to be missed. You know, he ran for 1,386 yards. He's banged up at the end. I didn't think it was real effective, although who was, against North Dakota State. He hasn't landed anywhere yet. And then you look down the list, and Jared White was pretty good for him 2 years ago. He and Elijah Elliott showed a lot of potential 2 seasons ago, and then they didn't really get the carries this year. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's not a surprise they left, but man, the cupboard is pretty empty behind the departures of those three, plus the graduation of Tommy Millan. You have Adam Jones, who's an absolute stud and is announced he's staying. Yep. And then they have to reload after that. But I go Al Johnson and I'll go Humphrey if I can pick top 2.
Yeah, I was going to bring up Adam Jones being at a big gain to get back. You know, having him recommit just as a freshman this year is big, especially if you do lose Humphrey out through the transfer portal. And there's no, you know, he could always try to come back, or I don't know what Vegan's thoughts on that are. I know with Bobby Houck in Montana, it's kind of, if you're gone, you're gone. So, but yeah, Rohan Jones is a massive loss. Of course, you're going to have to replace a quarterback in there too with Tommy Millat graduating. So that whole offense is just going to be it's going to be interesting to see what happens through the spring and into the fall next year. I'd say the biggest loss for a player that I thought of was Connor Moore losing. You know, like Fritz said, you graduate 2 offensive linemen and then you lose a third one that goes to the Big Ten. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how Vegan handles the next season with a major turnover. And, you know, the portal is closed now for Montana State. That ended last night. So anybody who hasn't left, you know, they might leave in the spring, but they can't declare now.
Yeah, good to know.
Yeah, Humphrey is a huge loss. I agree, but you do get back. I think I saw Julius Davis said he'll be back back at MSU this upcoming season, 2025, and like we mentioned already, Adam Jones announced that he'll be back for his sophomore campaign. I agree with Fritz. I'm really interested to see how this offensive line shakes out. He mentioned the 2 All-Americans that transferred last year, and obviously Connor Moore transferring this year to Michigan State. My sister is probably gonna be happy about that. She's a Spartan. Not sorry for all the Big Sky fans here, but no, Al Johnson, I think it's going to be a very big loss. Obviously, we know this Montana State team likes to run the football. Where does that start? It starts in the offensive line. I'm excited to see how it's going to shake out over the coming weeks, who they bring in to lead that position group.
Yeah, I mean, there's some pretty significant portal losses that Montana State has had, but I still goes back. I think their biggest loss is Tommy Mellott moving on. I think he was a generational quarterback there. They may never have anybody like that again, and I don't know what they got coming down the pipe. I think that might be the biggest question mark going into next year. I think their line, they lost some linemen, and that'll be up to the coaches to restock that. Rohan Jones, as you guys mentioned, was a loss, but I'm sorry they're down to maybe 6 really good running backs instead of 8 or 10 or whatever they have. If you're talking about guys who ran 2 years ago and couldn't even get on the field this year, I mean, some of them could have been borrowed by Idaho. I mean, they were down to guys that I mean, people on the team probably didn't even know who they were. But anyway, you got two running backs back in Jones and Davis, and they lose 2 or 3 defensive backs, and so that'll be an issue. But like I said, I think Tommy Mellott is the biggest loss that they have. The rest of them, I think, if they can figure out an offensive line, I think Montana State will be just fine next year.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll get into a little bit deeper about Bobcats losses later on in this episode. But moving on to the other team in Montana, the Grizz, they were able to maintain most of their key players, but they did lose a lot of players just running out of eligibility. A lot of their wide receiving core, White, Bergen, Fontes, Osmo, they're all out of eligibility. They did add linebacker Tolbert from Eastern Illinois and USC quarterback Jake Jensen. Is this already looking like a rebuild year next year for the Grizz, or do you think they can get things sorted pretty quickly and keep you optimistic about next season, John?
I mean, I don't really think that there is a rebuild year in college anymore with the transfer portal. It's just kind of you pick and choose what you can, and you put out the best team possible regardless. I think there's always a lot of turnover in college with graduating classes, and it's just gotten crazier with the portal now. But yeah, I mean, Montana's still going to have high expectations from the city of Missoula, from the rest of the state, from the early polls. They're going to be ranked high. So, like you mentioned, they get another quarterback in with Jake Jensen from USC. Didn't really do much in his time at USC. I think the last stats that he really put up were in his one season at BYU before he transferred. That'll bring in the competition for Ayat, like we mentioned earlier on this year for the spring ball. So, and a lot of that comes down to what spring's going to be like. The Grizz quarterback room got a little lighter now as Caden Hewitt and I can't remember his name. Yeah, Logan Fife transferred out. So, bringing in that quarterback is it's going to bring up that spring competition again. They also bring in Michael Wortham from Eastern Washington. Kind of a jack of all trades player, feels like. So he can throw it. He's been back on kick returns, receiving, rushing. So it'll be interesting to see. They also get in a couple of receivers. They get a P5 receiver from Arizona State in Corbin Hendricks. They get Rohrer in from Tennessee also at tight end. So you're kind of filling in some of the spots that they lost.
This defense is going to look a lot different next season. I think I saw that whether it's through transferring or just running out of eligibility, that 9 of the 10 leading tacklers from the season are going to be gone next year. And that's something that we saw happen with Sac State this year. And we talked about all year about kind of how their defense underperformed when they lost the bulk of their guys from the year prior. I think for Sac State, it was 10 of the 11 leading tacklers. So at least Montana has that on them. But no, John just mentioned Michael Wortham as well. Obviously, Junior Bergen's gone after this year. Wortham, I don't want to compare him to Junior Bergen because I mean, obviously Bergen's kind of in a league of his own there. But Wortham does have kind of that big playability. John mentioned he does return kickoffs. He had like 30 catches this year. He threw, I don't know, like 20 passes or something. He's really just kind of a do-it-all player that he was at Eastern Washington, that all-purpose guy where maybe you could slide him in and get a big play, kind of get him in space, that kind of deal. So, but no, I'm more looking forward to or looking at just kind of how this defense is going to be put together next season.
Yeah, defense, and I still think they need a little bit better quarterback play. I mean, they had two guys they rotated last year, and as we know, if you have 2, you kind of don't. A lot of times, you don't really have any. So they need somebody to step up and be their guy. They lose all those receivers that kind of got underused a little bit because of the quarterback play. So I think, if they get the quarterback situation figured out, like Ian said, they got to, fix their defense with all those guys they're losing. Like John and Ian mentioned, Wortham, he's a stud at Eastern. He was probably maybe a little underused, and I'm sure they'll find a way to use him as a returner and a running back, and maybe a wildcat quarterback at Montana. So he'll should be able to step in and give them a spark right away. And then one other guy to watch out for, maybe I don't know how much he'll play, but got a good name, Diesel Wilkinson from East Valley High in Spokane Valley. He was at Idaho, recruited by Montana, but signed with Idaho, and then he transferred to Montana. He's a defensive back, pretty good athlete. So it'll be interesting to see if he gets any playing time. But basically, I think that if they get their quarterback situation figured out, that'll solve a lot of stuff. They still got some pretty good running backs and Wortham, and so I guess it is kind of I guess you do kind of rebuild every year, depending on how many people you lose. It's not like basketball where maybe you just, the whole team transfers out and another team comes in. But there's a little bit of different roster management now.
Yeah, maybe not a rebuild, but like a retool, I guess you could say.
Yeah, reload.
Yeah, reload. There you go.
There you go.
If continuity means anything, I may be encouraged that most of that O-line is back for the Grizz. Mark mentioned Diesel Washington. They also picked up Micah Harper from BYU, so that'll help in the back end. Because they lost some good ones. Jackson went to Old Dominion, and the linebacker Riley Wilson went down to Arizona. Didn't realize it was 10 out of the top 11 tacklers, but it's one of those deals where the Grizz won 9 games last year, and people thought it was a down year. And I expect them to get 9 wins again every year, and that's the expectation. And this might be one of those years like 2008 where they just lay in the weeds and come out of spring ball and drop one early and just start cranking off wins. And like everybody else, I'm most excited about Michael Wortham. I thought he was an absolute great player for Eastern. So that's where I sit.
I do want to ask you, Fritz or John, the resident Grizz people here. We talked about IOT having that competition for spring training, or for spring, not training, and bringing in Jake Jensen. Do you think that accomplishes that goal of bringing in the competition for IOT, or do you think it's IOT's job, even with Jensen being there?
Well, I think IOT's the favorite, but Bobby's always said, it's always a competition. He's going to bring in. We knew, or anybody who follows the Grizz would know, that he was going to bring in a transfer quarterback when he had 5 transfer out and Hewitt transfer out, and it's going to be, I don't know if it'll even be one of those two. There's still, I think Gage Slider is maybe down the list, but I'm interested that now that the quarterback room has been thinned, if the kid from Columbia Falls might not get a look, Jace. So, we'll see what happens, but spring ball is spring ball, and he probably won't make a decision then. Not that it'll win him any games later, but that's just the way it goes. And that's favorite, but I can't really call it.
Fair enough. Moving on to a team that Ian was just mentioning, Sacramento State. You can make an argument that they've had the most positivity as far as changes go. They bring in Brendan Marion. They landed the top transfer in the FCS, Tulane quarterback Cardell Williams. Do you think all these changes to the Hornets are going to quickly make them a team to watch in the Big Sky in the FCS, or is it going to take a little bit more time for them to regroup and get this thing situated under Marion's tutelage? What do you think, Ian?
Yeah, I'm certainly going to be watching them just because of the amount of FBS transfer that they brought in. I think if they're up to 21 with the portal closed now, I think it's 24 transfers overall that they've brought in. So for that lone fact alone, I'm going to be watching and kind of seeing how that all comes in. But I pump the brakes a little bit when you bring in that many transfers, especially, they're coming off of the season that they just had, obviously disappointment for them. I think it kind of takes a little bit to gel. I don't know if they're going to be competing for a Big Sky conference championship right off the bat. Certainly, they possibly could if everything happens, if everything gels well together. But under a new head coach with this many new players coming in, I don't think it's going to be a year one success immediately. But I'm certainly got my eyes on them.
Yeah, remember they were 3-9 last year, and they lost their last 5, and they were talked about as being a playoff team. So we'll see. Like Ian said, I thought 21 FBS transfers to there, and they lost their running back Tao Tolliver to Michigan State. So that's kind of a big one. I mean, everything you read on the internet is how they're loading up and they're going to be back, but we'll see. I mean, they still have their sights set on joining the Mountain West or whatever. So maybe they need to be a little better in the Big Sky before they think about moving up to the Mountain West.
Fritz, where do you think the Hornets are at now?
Well, like Mark said, it's they're obviously trying to get into the full subdivision. However unlikely or unrealistic it seems to us, I don't think they have that much money. I think UC Davis is a better bet to move up. But yeah, all those FBS transfers. I guess I'm wondering what the Hornets record was before Troy Taylor showed up, because he really got things done in a hurry when he was a coach before he took the Stanford job. And I don't know if Mr. Marion is cut from the same cloth. I guess we'll find out in the fall.
Yeah, I mean, it's just things that I've read online about Marion is they thought that he was a perfect hire for that team, and he could have got possible FBS jobs, but he just liked what Sacramento State had to offer. And I think with the idea of them possibly moving up, it was an appealing job for him. But John, what are your thoughts on where Sacramento State is now?
Yeah, the idea of all those FBS transfers got me kind of wondering how much are they kind of flashing around that potential move to the FBS in that, they've been in the news a lot with the whole $50 million in NIL thing, is whatever you want to believe with that. So I wonder how much that's kind of played into some of these kids maybe making that decision to head out to Sacramento. I'm interested, of course, to see how they're going to look in the fall, but I'm interested to see what the springtime brings and how many of those kids may end up leaving once again, or how many do stay through that spring transfer window. So, but yeah, it'll just be interesting to see. I mean, a big get at quarterback, of course, that's going to be nice for the team. Losing Tao Tolliver is difficult, but you have a new head coach and a lot of turnover, so it's kind of leaving an unpredictable fall.
The other team in the Big Sky that has had a ton of changes is the Idaho Vandals. They did bring in new head coach Thomas Ford Jr. Last time we spoke, Mark, you were telling us how many transfers they had. I know they added Lanyata Alexander, former Husky and Bobcat player, as well as Maurice Heim, who was a defensive end for the Huskies. And they were able to retain one running back at least with Eli Cummings. How are we feeling now, as opposed to the end of the season, where the Vandals stand with their roster and with their head coaching change, Mark?
Yeah, I at first thought was I think they're going to be okay. I mean, they were hit pretty hard in the portal the year before, and they bounced back. Now, obviously, that wasn't anything like this last year where they lose their head coach and about 24 guys go in the portal. And, I wrote down the guys that stayed and the guys that left, and it took up most of this cheat sheet for today. So we'll see. I mean, there's like 6 of the guys that went in the portal decided to come back, Cummings being one of them. Cortez Menjivar, the number 3 wide receiver, linebacker Isaiah King, and 3 O linemen. But you look at the guys they lost, and it was like a who's who of, it's like the all Big Sky team. Dwyer to TCU, McDougal to San Diego State, and then the pipeline from Idaho to New Mexico. They lose Jack Lane, running back Buchanan, Abraham Williams, Jackson Eck, which you figured, a couple other guys, James Newby. I thought he was out of eligibility, but apparently he's got another year. So it'd be kind of fun to see him wreak havoc down there. And they lose Hamper to Wisconsin. So they lost a ton of really, really good players. And I know just seeing Twitter, they're bringing in a bunch of guys too, but you don't know how good these guys are. I mean, it's not like the 5-star recruits that go to SEC school. Everybody knows who they are and what they can do. So I think they'll be just fine, but we'll see. They still got their quarterback Wagner and the backup. So we'll find out in the spring what they have for a new team under the new coach.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. I think the new coach board was a good hire, and yeah, 9 guys hit hit the portal and went up a level, and 6 of them went with Eck to New Mexico. And I think Jordan Dreyer is going to be a big loss. I really liked him, really liked the way he played, and I didn't realize that about Keyshawn. I just thought he was done. I mean, he's been around forever. He had 2 years or 3 years at Montana Tech, so I think Idaho's going to be fine. Maybe not quite as good as last year, but depending on schedule and if they're having 3 O linemen back, I think they'll just keep charging on. I do want to say I blanked the name before. Cody Schweiker was a kid from Columbia Falls. I just kind of think he's a dark horse to play a little quarterback for the Grizz.
Yeah, I was also kind of surprised to see Keyshawn James Newby's name on that transfer list when I was looking it up today. Heading to New Mexico. I wonder, Fritz would know more, but maybe with the whole junior college thing, I don't know if he spent a year at a junior college or if he was just at Tech, because Pavia suing and getting all those junior college players that extra year of eligibility is kind of throwing an extra wrench into what's already a crazy system. But I know me and Fritz kind of talked. I can't remember if it was on the podcast or just in the office, but Idaho seemed to go through coaches back, when he was younger in the 80s and stuff like that, and they always continued to keep up the high level of play regardless before they made the move up to the FBS. So I really don't see too much difference. Of course, it's going to be a lot of turnover and everything, but at this level, you can bring in players back, and they've kind of established themselves now back atop the FCS and the Big Sky. So I'm really interested to see how they play and if they can keep up that top level with the new coach.
Yeah, kind of similarly to how I felt about Sac State. I think I like to, maybe pump the brakes a little bit, just kind of see how things go through spring ball, maybe the first 2 weeks of the season once the fall rolls around again. I also like the Ford hire. I think he's going to bring a lot of good things to that program. Obviously, they've had a ton of success the last couple years up there with Eck there, and I obviously it's a whole different coaching staff now. But Mark did mention 2 years ago when it seemed like just about every offensive skill position player transferred up to the FBS. So we've seen them overcome that recently, and hopefully we'll see them overcome it again once the 2025 season rolls around.
Yeah, I'm curious to see that when they had so many quarterback injuries and Wagner was forced to play a lot of meaningful games, I think that pays dividends to the Vandals now that Jack Lane has left as well. So looks like it should be Wagner's job to lose, but we'll see what Ford decides to do at the quarterback position. Moving on to other schools in the Big Sky, there was a lot of teams that were atop the Big Sky that lost some key players. You got Montana State losing Malott, UC Davis losing Hastings and Larison. Grizz lost a lot of their wide receiving core. Out of all the teams in the Big Sky, are we expecting to see any surprises? Some teams maybe towards the bottom that are going to take a leap next year, or do we expect that this to be the same Big Sky it always is, and the top 4 or 5 teams will still be the top 4 or 5 teams, Fritz?
Yeah, the haves and the have-nots. Yeah, I don't see Northern Colorado or Weber State getting a lot better. Weber State lost a ton of good kids, including Bankston down to New Mexico with Eck. If I had to pick a couple dark horses, I look at Idaho State. I'm sure there's a connection between not being very good and having fewer transfers, fewer kids hitting the portal. But Idaho State has a little continuity going, and I like their coach, and I like the way they play offense. So I would pick them or Sac State, and I'll go back to the Grizz. I think people count them out because they didn't have their greatest year last year. And as Joe Glenn once told me, I think they're laying in the weeds. And so we'll see how they do.
Yeah, I think Montana State, get back to the playoffs and everything. I don't know, how seeding's going to rank out, but I could definitely see, like Fritz is saying, Montana kind of laying in the weeds and getting, pulling off a 10-game win streak after an early loss or something like that. Montana State, I think there's a lot of unpredictability in terms of quarterback play now. offensive line. How are they going to stack up, losing the coach, losing 3 big time players? So, but I think that, they'll retool because they always do. It's always Montana State, up at the top of the conference. One of the teams that I think is going to, I don't know if you could call them really a dark horse after this season because they made the playoffs, but I think Northern Arizona is going to put it together again for another season. I think the Lumberjacks will get back. I could see them winning 9 games next year. So I think that's kind of my bold prediction, I guess, for 2025.
Man, John just stole my thunder. I was gonna give some credit to Northern Arizona.
Yeah, we haven't talked
They
a
didn't
lot
lose.
about them, but yeah, they just like Fritz was saying, I don't think they've had a lot of transfers. So go ahead, Ian. But yeah, there should be a sleeper team.
Yeah, I was just about to mention that. I don't think they lost a ton of the portal, brought in a couple of guys. I mean, it's a team that just made the playoffs last year, and I don't think we've talked about them at all since they lost their playoff game. I'm excited to see just kind of how they develop after this year, making it to that postseason for the first time since 2017, I think, if I remember right. Um, this one's more of a dark horse. You kind of get a feeling that Eastern has to turn it around eventually. Uh, I know they've lost a ton this year. Vesperis transfer. We just talked about Wortham. Chisholm graduated this year or ran out of eligibility. I'm not saying they're going to compete for a Big Sky Conference championship, but I kind of get the feeling that it's been a couple of down years in a row now. Maybe they kind of get back into the mid ranks of the conference and maybe start getting back into the top tier in the coming years as well. So that's something I'm keeping my eye out for. Maybe a no one believes in us kind of season from Aaron Best there.
Yeah, we'll see about Eastern. It's funny. If we were doing this podcast 5 years ago, we'd be talking about them, as one of the top team or one of the top teams in the league. So it's kind of hard to talk about, mention them as a dark horse these days. It's kind of sad in our, Ian, in my area that they've dropped that far because they have a pretty good run at it, and they're still the last Big Sky team to win a national title in FCS. So as far as other surprises, I mean, you can't say, Montana State and Idaho would only be surprises if they dropped a little bit. They should be 3 of the top teams in the league. You guys mentioned Northern Arizona. I think they still have Ty Pennington back, so they should be able to build on that. I think they were 3rd in the league last year, so they could be a quote unquote surprise, or maybe more accurately just kind of build on what they did last year. Fritz mentioned Idaho State. I liked Idaho State too. They'll have a new quarterback, but it seems like Cody Hawkins has been doing some things there. They played Montana State tough. They I can't remember who else they beat, somebody else, but they had a pretty good season, 5-7, stuff like that, which is pretty good in Pocatello. I mean, usually they're 1 or 2 wins and stuff like that. And then we mentioned Eastern, and it would be nice, but they're going to have a new quarterback. When their quarterback leaves and Wortham leaves, we don't know who's going to replace them and stuff. And I don't know. I don't know how Eastern's going to get better. You kind of hope they are, because it's more fun when they're in the hunt too. So I would say probably Northern Arizona and then Idaho State, or maybe flop those 2 as far as who are the quote unquote surprises on deck for 2025.
I know during the regular season, at least, my picks were the worst. So maybe my pick doesn't matter, but I think if any teams can go from the bottom towards the top, I think my pick has to be Sacramento State, just for the simple fact that they added so many FBS players, and getting Cardell Williams, I think, automatically makes your team better. New coach in there. We talked about that all season about should they fire their last coach and bring in a new one, and they ended up doing that. So I think good things for the Hornets, and if they're trying to make that leap, they have to get better, and they have to get better quickly. But that's going to wrap up this episode of the Big Sky Now podcast. We don't have much else to talk about the rest of the season, so we will be taking a hiatus from the podcast. We will be starting basketball here in the next coming weeks. But once spring ball starts, we'll get some episodes going, get you guys updated with some new football news whenever that does begin. I want to thank my panel for being here with me all year, Fritz, John, Ian, and Mark. We look forward to having the same panel back once football news starts to get going again. But thank you all for joining us throughout the season. It's been a pleasure being your host. We'll see you all soon, and join us again for the Big Sky Now podcast when we switch to basketball in a few weeks. Until then, take care, guys. Thank you.
At Van Law Firm in Kalispell, we're dedicated to providing expert and compassionate legal support to individuals and families in the Flathead Valley. With years of experience in criminal defense, personal injury, and estate planning, our team has a proven track record of achieving favorable outcomes for our clients. We understand that legal matters can be stressful, so we prioritize clear communication and work closely with you every step of the way. Contact us today for a free consultation and let us put our experience to work for you. Visit vanlawfirm.com or call us at 406-826-6529.